this will be a practice for pharaohs later on, as we'll see. So this is the first dynasty. The second dynasty lasts for 200 years, as long as America has been in business. But we know hardly anything about it, just a few names. But that gives you an idea of how remote this is in time for us. But the third dynasty, the one that comes next, is where it all happens. It's where Egypt becomes great, powerful, and does great things. And it starts with King Zasser, the builder of the first pyramid. Now, let me give you a little bit of tomb archaeology, a little bit of the history of the development of architecture. Now, remember from the lesson on prehistoric Egypt that they buried originally in sand pit burials, just simple burials? What happened frequently is that the sand would blow away, exposing the body. Animals would get at it. Usually jackals, by the way. There's an interesting thing about the jackal and why jackals are associated with funerals and funerary rites. The jackal has an unusual digestive system. It prefers decayed meat, so it prowls cemeteries. That's why jackals are associated in ancient Egypt with the dead. But often jackals would get at these bodies from the sandpit burials, eat it, destroy it, and it became very clear that a sandpit burial was not permanent. Something better had to be done. Well, what did they do? They removed the sand down to bedrock when they were doing a burial. And they would cut in the rock a pit. And that's where they would bury, cover it over with stone, and then you had a permanent burial. Now, eventually, these rock-cut burials in the ground became elaborate, fancy. Someone got the idea, early on, that you could put a superstructure over it. A kind of rectangular enclosure made of mud bricks at first. And it could even have a room in it where somebody could go in and pay their respects to the dead. Now, this kind of burial, this rectangular above-ground burial, is called in Arabic a mastaba. Right? It's the Arabic word for bench because it's rectangular, like a bench. Right? So these mastabas are the early burials, and the pharaohs in Saqqara have mastabas. Now, from the mastaba, it's just a short jump to the pyramid, and let me explain why. The king who really is given credit for starting with the first pyramid is King Zasser, third dynasty. And we know the name of his architect, who probably really is the one who should get the credit, Imhotep. The reason we know his name is a statue base, just the base of a statue, a couple of feet, you know.
Welcome, good people. The last time we were talking about ancient burials and the first king to unify Egypt. So I thought we continue that. Now, you just heard him mention Imhotep. He wasn't a king. Imhotep wasn't a king, but he was very influential in the structural development of Egypt. As you'll hear, he put Egypt on the map in a big way.
You see the feet, it's broken off, but there's an inscription around the base, and it talks about Imhotep, and it gives his titles. And Imhotep was the royal architect of Zasser. So he is probably the one who had the idea for the first pyramid in history. Now what he did was this, he was just building a big mastaba for Zasser. That's all he was doing. They were planning a mastaba. A large one, big as a football field. Then he had the idea, let's make it special. Let's put another mastaba on top of it. So you'd have a mastaba with a second mastaba. A little smaller though, so you have like a step effect. And then they decided to make it even bigger. So they enlarged the base, made another mastaba on top of that one, you have 3 mastabas, and they kept going. Till you get 5 layers on top, the step pyramid of Saqqara. It is the first pyramid that we have. It's not a true pyramid, that's why we call it the stepped pyramid. But there are some remarkable features about this pyramid. First, what I find most amazing, it's the first building in stone in the history of the world. Now, to me, it would seem as if you would start with small things. You'd have lots of small buildings around, learn how to work stone, then you go to something bigger, and you'd see transitions. But no, this is the first building in stone in the history of the world. And it's grand. It was probably 3 or 4 times taller than any other building on the planet. It must have been incredible to watch it being built. If you were a kid in Saqqara, watching the pharaoh's tomb being built, it must have been amazing. Now, it wasn't just the pyramid that he built, though. There's an entire complex that goes with it.
So, you talk about the step pyramids. Ah, yes, the step pyramid. The step pyramids inspired, and this is just me talking, inspired other cultures to build their own pyramids. Somehow or another, if you do the research, you will find out that there are step pyramids all throughout the world, especially in South America. Why? I don't know. But we're going to find out. I believe the Mayas have a step pyramid. And I heard tell, it was a while back, but I heard that there was a stone head, a stone head with an enlarged nose, like a classic African Negro. So I can only assume that either the South Americans figured out a way to go to Africa and took that knowledge back with them, or the Africans went to South America and they shared this information. Only 2 ways I can think of, y'all. But at the end of the day, what I have learned is that history has not been taught to us the way it actually happened. And that's why I make these videos, because I want to know, what didn't they tell us? And some of this stuff is just common sense, If you just sit back, listen to the story, and you're like, wait a minute, well, if that happened, then why did they put this in the book? Or if that happened, then why did they leave it out the book? I don't have the answer to everything, but I want to find out, and I think you should know too. We've been lied to, y'all. We've been deceived. And I think it's about time we got some answers. I don't think they're going to tell us, truthfully. So we'll have to examine the information and find our own answers.
Zoser also had, next to his pyramid, a little room, which is called a serdab. It's a technical architectural term in Egypt. A serdab is a little room where he included a statue of himself, life-size. And the serdab is neat. It's like a telephone booth, practically, that size, made out of stone. It has 2 holes drilled in it, so Zoser's statue can look out for eternity. Now, this statue has a purpose. In case Zoser's body was destroyed for some reason, perhaps by tomb robbers, perhaps by the elements, water table, whatever. If his body were destroyed, this statue would be where his soul would know it could live till it resurrected. So it would take the place of Zoser's mummy. Right? Now, in addition to this serdab, as we call it, Zoser also built chapels in stone all around the pyramid complex are these little chapels. Now, these were for religious ceremonies. For eternity, though. Remember, this is the first building in stone. Nothing like it's ever been done. And let me say this about the architecture. They didn't know how to build in stone, really. They were doing amazing things. For example, they were imitating what they were used to building in wood and in straw and in papyrus. They were imitating it in stone. So, for example, where they had wooden doors that would swing open, well, they would build a door out of stone that looked like a wooden door, but it couldn't swing. It was too heavy, too big. It was just decorative. It was a false door. But they were just imitating what they were used to building. Even the columns in the complex. There's a hall where you enter the complex, which has columns. But those columns, if you look at them carefully, they look like they're fluted. They have lines going down them. What they imitate are bundles of papyrus tied together. That's how they built columns before stone buildings. Simply long stalks looking like sugar cane, bundled together, and that was a pillar. So they built it out of stone. So everything looks like it's made out of wood, made out of papyrus, but it's just imitated in stone. Now, in addition, Zoser was going to celebrate a festival for eternity. It's called the Hebsed Festival. It's one of those things that we've been puzzling about in Egyptology for many years, how it started. Let me give you a kind of tradition. The pharaoh was the physical ruler of Egypt. He wasn't just like the Queen of England, a figurehead, a political ruler. He was literally the one who had to ride out in battle. He was the one who had to lead the army. He was the one who had to do it all. What happens if the pharaoh becomes old and feeble? What do you do? Well, there's a tradition, people talk about it, that in the very early days, the pharaoh was killed. Ritually. Literally, but ritually, as a ritual, when he got too old. So that a new king could take his place. We don't have a lot of evidence for that, but we talk about it. But then came a ritual that we know for sure happened. At some point, a pharaoh would say, well, I might be getting old, but I can have a religious ceremony which will magically rejuvenate me. This is called the Hebsed Festival. It's a festival in which the pharaoh would run a race course, a short one, I'm sure. He would wrestle with younger men. He would shoot arrows to show that he was still accurate, could still see things well. And after that festival, he would be rejuvenated by magic. He would be young again. It's much better than being killed. And this festival was celebrated every 30 years. So after a pharaoh had ruled for 30 years, he would celebrate his Hebsed festival. Now Zoser built a Hebsed courtyard. It was an area where he would celebrate his festival for eternity. So when he got to the next world, every 30 years, he could continue to be rejuvenated. Now, the Step Pyramid is an amazing, amazing monument, and it's probably due to the architect Imhotep. Now, the search for Imhotep's tomb is one of the great stories of all time. Walter B. Emery, an Egyptologist in the 1950s, decided to look for Imhotep's tomb, and he had an idea. Zoser was buried at Saqqara, probably
1950, y'all. So this guy, either American or British, more than likely, he's looking for King Joshua's tomb over in Africa. But in 1950, something else was happening over in America. The descendants of Egypt were over in America. Now remember, Egypt in a sense was like America, whereas you had people from all different regions of Africa coming together, pulling their resources together to make Egypt great. Okay? Egypt just didn't get that way by itself. You had influence from other tribes, from other parts of Africa. But they did everything on such a grand scale that a lot of times Egypt overshadows other places, like the Sudan, for instance. The Kushites, they when it was time for war, it's been said that the Kush, they had excellent bowmen. You know, when you think of people shooting bow and arrow now, you think of Robin Hood and some old country boys. But guess what? We started that. Our ancient ancestors started the bow and arrow. We let it go. We let a lot of stuff go. And I don't think we should be ashamed anymore of where we come from. Like I said before, whether it's good or bad, us Negroes, we should determine what we accept and what we don't accept. You want to go out and shoot bows and arrows out in the woods for target practice, to go hunting, that's your prerogative. You shouldn't be looked at different because your skin is dark compared to everybody else. Your ancient ancestors is the one that started it. So, let's get back to our story.
As a thank you to his architect, Xhosa would permit Imhotep to be buried near him. So it was believed that the tomb of Imhotep was at Saqqara. But where? Well, Imhotep had a tremendous reputation. He was not only an architect, he was a physician. And he later became deified as a god. And even the Greek god Aesculapius is really related to Imhotep. The Greek god of healing and medicine, Aesculapius, really comes from the Egyptian Imhotep. Now, Emery knew that people had made pilgrimage to Saqqara. He saw lots of pots on the surface. Pilgrims tend to drop pots and break them along routes. But we knew that people came to Saqqara for healing. It was like a Lourdes of the ancient world. And he believed they were making a pilgrimage to the tomb of Imhotep. So Emery started excavating where he thought was a likely site, where he saw these pots, and he dug down and he hit a tunnel, looking very much in size like a subway. Now that tunnel was filled with mummified birds, ibises.
Mummified birds?
These were offerings that pilgrims had brought to Imhotep. Now, when Imhotep became a god, the bird that was associated with him was an ibis. So Emery knew he was on the trail of Imhotep's tomb.
All right, people. I'm going to end that there. And we'll pick up on that later. I got some other business to take care of. But like I said, think about it. 1950. This guy goes over to Africa looking for dead bodies and whatever else he can find over there associated with Egypt. But at the same time, the descendants of those people were struggling in the United States. So let's find out. Find out. Do your research. See what was going on in America in 1950 when they were over there raiding Egypt. I'll talk to you later.